It's quiet here, in the shadow of the Himalayas. The sun hasn't quite climbed over the ridges yet. You can feel it hovering somewhere behind the snowy peaks, like a shy guest waiting for permission to enter the room. The air is thin, but clean crisp enough to pinch your nose, soft enough to carry the smell of sheep wool and firewood down from the hills. You're standing on a sloped path, the earth beneath your feet cold and packed, sprinkled with pebbles and bits of straw. Behind you, a trail of boot prints your own stretch back through a field of frost-bitten grass. Ahead, the roofs of a small village rise in uneven clusters, thatched in stone and prayer flags fluttering with lazy confidence. One of them tangles in the breeze, like it has no job and no regrets. There is the sound of a bell, distant, metallic, deliberate. A yak moves slowly across the ridge, head bobbing with the rhythm of someone who's got nowhere to be and all day to get there. Welcome to the village of Pangmo. The year is vague. Early. Pre-minus radio. Pre-minus railway. Post-minus stone, but not by much. It's hard to tell time in a place where not much changes except the seasons and the quality of the butter. A quick warning, you probably won't make it through this day. It's okay. It's not the altitude, it's the pace. The way things unfold here is so gentle, so sleepy, that your eyelids may surrender before the first pot of tea is poured. But before you drift off completely, do click that little like button if your hands aren't already under the blanket. Subscribe if stories like this are your cup of yak milk tea. And if you're still with me, let us know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. It starts, like many things in these parts, with a pat of butter. You step off the path and into a narrow courtyard. A woman is kneeling by a large wooden churn, her sleeves rolled up, her fingers red from the cold. She doesn't look at you just to focus on the task. The churn creaks as she pushes the plunger down, again and again like a prayer in motion. This is Tsering. She's 30-7, which in this altitude is both young and ancient. Her family has churned yak, butter on this same stone floor for generations. Her hands know the rhythm like a song passed down without lyrics. She pauses and tastes the edge of her wooden paddle, lips pursed. Still too soft, she murmurs to no one in particular. The butter must be firmer before it can be shaped, packed, and blessed. Because in this village, butter isn't just food. It's offering. It's trade. It's reputation. In fact, butter is one of the oldest forms of wealth in Himalayan cultures, older than coins, older than contracts, possibly older than gossip. Scholars still debate whether butter sculptures predate written prayers or vice versa, which seems like the sort of argument best had over hot tea and warm bread. A child runs past you, trailing a string tied to an empty spool. His laughter echoes off the stone walls. The village is waking up. Smoke rises from the chimney tops, curling into the pale morning. You follow the scent of toasted barley and fresh dung smoke, oddly comforting. This isn't the kind of breakfast that rushes, it arrives when it's ready, like everything here. You pass a goat standing on someone's roof. It doesn't blink. And at the edge of the square, there's a low building with a painted lintel and prayer wheels by the door. A butter merchant lives here. You knock. No answer. Because a chia's already outside, behind you, rearranging sacks of barley flour on a cart, muttering about the weight. His name is Dodge. He once traded a single yak for 3 wheels of butter and a wool coat with a hole in the elbow. He claims it was the best deal of his life. Whether or not that's true is, of course, up for debate. But then again, truth like butter melts under enough pressure. You follow Dodge down the road. It isn't really a road, of course. It's more of a suggestion carved by cartwheels and goat hooves, winding along the valley's edge. The sun is up now, spreading gold across the frost like someone spilled honey on cold slate. Dodge walks ahead, his pace steady but slow. He pulls his yacht cart behind him, wooden wheels squeaking in protest. On it are bundles wrapped in woolen straw parcels of butter shaped like bricks, marked with red stamps that look suspiciously like the village seal and also suspiciously like his personal doodle. You ask where HES going? To Jian, he says. 3 days. If weather's kind. If not 5. You look at the sky. The clouds are polite today, hovering like monks in mid-Midas chant. You set off beside him. The air smells of pine and snowmalt. Ravens circle overhead, eyeing the cart, disappointed by the lack of anything truly scandalous. Along the way, George tells you how butter became the backbone of the valley. It wasn't always that way. Once, long ago, the village tried to trade yak wool, then barley, then briefly mushrooms. But people remember butter, he says. It's smooth. It's warm. And it doesn't ask questions. You ask if he ever tires of it. George shrugs. Better than gold. You can't eat gold. In fact, during certain Himalayan festivals, butter is shaped into intricate sculptures, flowers, temples, dragons that are blessed displayed, and then left to melt as an offering. A reminder that beauty, like warmth, is fleeting. You cross a shallow stream. The wheels dip, splash, and emerge dripping. A young monk appears out of nowhere barefoot, smiling, holding out a bowl. George hands him a small pat of butter, neatly wrapped in a leaf. The boy bows and disappears. You wonder if he was real. George doesn't seem concerned either way. By midday, you stop at a stone outcrop to rest. George opens a leather pouch and hands you a slice of barley bread. He smears it with butter, thickened golden. You bite. It's earthy, creamy, and oddly comforting, like a good memory you didn't know you had. He tells you how, during the harshest winters, the butter trade saved the village. When no one could grow food, they traded for it. When animals died, they bartered with fat. When morale collapsed, they sculpted butter lions and set them on the monastery steps, because nothing frightens away despair quite like a lion made of dairy. You ask how he learned the trade. He looks out over the valley, eyes soft. From my grandmother, he says. She could tell the weather from how butter tasted. You nod, as if that makes sense. And it does in its own way. You both sit quietly for a while. The wind picks up, carrying distant bells. Somewhere behind you, the village you left this morning is turning smaller. But the butter, tucked in straw, is safe. Carried forward, one slow wheel at a time. And ahead, the next village waits. Hungry, hopeful, and maybe a little suspicious about those red stamps. The road narrows now, climbing toward the high pass. George pulls his coat tighter, and you do the same, though yours isn't nearly as impressive. His is lined with sheepskin and patched with pieces of old grain sacks, each patch a different story, he claims. One, sewn near the elbow, is from a wedding tent. Another, near the hem, used to be a saddlebag. Nothing wasted, he says with a shrug. Even old memories. The yak snorts. It, too, has no patience for sentiment. You continue upward, the path winding through crags and loose gravel. The air is thinner here, and your lungs work a little harder. George, meanwhile, breathes like a man sipping soup. Effortlessly. The cart creaks with each turn. The butter remains tightly bundled. The straw insulation smells sweet and faintly smoky, like last year's harvest stored in old cloth. High above, an eagle watches. George tells you how once, during a storm, he lost 2 wheels and most of his load. He spent the night under the cart, eating nothing but raw flour and laughing at the absurdity of life. Butter, he says, is always trying to escape. You round a bend, and there, in the cleft between 2 jagged peaks, is a worn stone marker. A small stupa sits beside it, draped in prayer flags. Someone has left a spoonful of melted butter on a flat rock, already half-minus frozen. A tiny gesture to keep the spirits of the past from getting bored. And now, a strange but true cultural tidbit. In some Himalayan villages, people used to believe that butter could absorb bad dreams. They deplace a tiny lump in a clay bowl beside their pillow, then bury it in the morning. Dream composting, in a way. You pause to rest, leaning on a rock shaped like an old man's face. George offers you dried apricots, which you accept with numb fingers. "Not far now," he says. Then adds, "Well, far enough." You both laugh. Or wheeze. It's hard to tell at this altitude. The wind gusts hard. Your scarf snaps like a flag. George checks the cart. Everything is still in place. The yak frowns, which you didn't know was possible. Below you, the valley you came from looks like a miniature painting. Tiny roofs. Tiny trails. A dot of smoke rising from C-Ring's chimney, maybe. Or someone else's. And ahead, only rock, wind, and the promise of trade. You step forward, one careful foot at a time. By the time you descend into the next valley, your legs are wobbly, your nose is pink, and your thoughts have slowed into a kind of dreamy hum. George seems fine. The yak is smug. The butter is, miraculously, still cold. You follow a narrow path down into a village smaller than Pang Mo. Its houses built close together like huddled bodies in the snow. There's a single prayer wheel by the gate, still spinning from the last visitor's hand. A boy runs past, shouting in joy at the sight of the cart. He disappears inside a home, then returns dragging his grandmother, who squints at George and barks. Late again. George bows. Not in apology, but in greeting. "Only by a season," he says. They both laugh, which feels like a ritual more than a joke. You unload the parcels together, placing them on woven mats in the center of the square. People gather. A woman with 2 braids inspects the butter bricks, sniffing them, tapping them as if determining their moral character. One man weighs them on a handmade scale, adding stones for balance. Another pulls out a small pouch and trades you to wool scarves and a dried fish for a half-minus brick. It's a butter market, but it feels more like a reunion. This is Jian. A trade stop. A rest point. A place where people remember each other through what they carry, not what they say. George gives a speech. It's short and slightly sarcastic. Something about butter being more trustworthy than politicians. People laugh and nod like this is an accepted truth. Yuri handed a cup of butter tea, thick, salty, and slightly alarming. But it warms your fingers and throat. You sip slowly. Now here's your historical fact for the night. Butter tea, or po cha, has been a staple in Himalayan life for centuries, used to combat the cold and high altitude. It's made from strong tea, yak butter, and salt, turned into a frothy blend. It's also offered to guests as a sign of warmth and respect, no matter how confused their facial expression might be. Across the square, a monk is sculpting a tiny figure from butter. It looks like a snow lion. Sort of. His hands are steady. A small crowd watches, offering no suggestions, just reverence. You notice a child taking a fingertip of butter from one sculpture and eating it. The monk notices, too. He pretends not to. Scholars still debate whether the butter sculptures were ever meant to be consumed or if everyone just got hungry and pretended it was spiritual. The sun lowers. Fires are lit. George sits with an old friend, reminiscing over half-minus sentences. You catch phrases like the blizzard year and the time the goat got into the barley. You lean back against a stone wall, full of tea and silence. And somewhere nearby, someone sings a lullaby in a language you don't understand, but somehow remember. The butter is gone now, traded, gifted, sculpted. But the warmth remains. The next morning arrives wrapped in fog. You wake on a mat near a hearth, your breath visible in the air like a thought escaping your mouth. The fire has dwindled to a soft, orange murmur, and someone has left a bowl of warm porridge at your side. It tastes like roasted barley unkindness. Outside, the village of Jian stirs slowly. You hear the soft thump of hooves on frozen earth, the creak of wood, the occasional whisper of sweeping brooms. I womanize bundles of herbs above a doorway. A man with a limp sharpens a blade that looks older than most countries. You find Dorj by the cart, checking the straps and drubbing warmth into the yak's ears. He greets you with a nod, then hands you a small cloth pouch filled with tea leaves and dried nettles. For the road, he says. But today, you're not leaving yet. You're headed to the monastery. The stone path snakes up behind the village like a lazy dragon. You follow it slowly, breathing in the chilled air, watching your steps between stones slick with frost and old lichen. At the top is a squat, square structure wrapped in silence and smoke. A monk waits at the entrance. He smiles. You bow. The kind of bow where you're not sure who you're bowing to, but you do it anyway. And it feels right. Inside, the butter sculptures are everywhere. Long rows of shelves hold delicately carved forms, towers, lotuses, deer, dragons, spirals of flame. Some are bright with saffron dye. Others are simply pale yellow, their details softened by time or warmth. Candles flicker. Prayer flags hang overhead like faded sentences. This is Loseo season, the Tibetan New Year, and these sculptures are part offering, part art, part reminder that even beauty must surrender to time. One sculpture leans precariously. A monk gently nudges it back into place with the corner of his robe, as if tucking in a child. Here's your obscure tidbit for today. Some monks trained for years in the art of Tuor-en, a butter sculpture using wooden paddles. Their bare hands, and sometimes chold brass molds. They say it teaches patience, dexterity, and the futility of permanence. Not unlike assembling IKEA furniture during a power outage. You sit quietly beside a window. Outside, the wind whistles through prayer flags. Inside, the butter lions gaze back at you like old friends. A monk offers you tea in a chipped ceramic cup. You thank him. He nods once, then turns to adjust a tiny butter stew pot that's beginning to melt in the afternoon sunbeam. Dorj arrives late, of course. He carries a fresh block of butter wrapped in red cloth. It's placed in the center of the altar. No speech. No ceremony. Just quiet respect. Then he winks at you and mutters, "Good year, this batch." The wind shifts. A butter phoenix on the third shelf gives up and slumps gently sideways. You leave the monastery in the golden hush of late afternoon. The sky has turned pale blue, the kind that almost disappears if you stare too long. The path down is quiet. You and Dorj walk without speaking, listening to the crunch of gravel beneath your feet and the occasional call of a raven, who clearly wants attention but has turned it. Back in the village square, preparations are underway. Tonight is the butter light ceremony. Children dart between the houses carrying clay lamps. Women stir vats of clarified butter over open fires, skimming the foam with wooden ladles. An old man arranges wicks rolled from torn prayer scrolls and cotton into tiny stone bowls. The smell is something between holy and homely smoke, salt, butter, and pine. You help carry trays to the shrine in the village center, a platform draped in reed cloth and pressed flowers. One child insists on giving you the special lamp, which looks identical to all the others, but is delivered with such conviction that you don't question it. As dusk falls, the lamps are lit. One by one, flames flicker to life across the village, dotting rooftops, windowsills, ledges, and steps. The wind calms. Even the animals seem to pause. The whole world holds its breath. George hands you a fresh cup of tea and says, "They say light carries the prayers faster." You sip. It's warm and strange and perfect. And now, you historical fact butter lamps have been part of Himalayan ritual practice for centuries, used to symbolize the dispelling of darkness, ignorance, and cold. In Buddhist tradition, offering light is a form of merit minus, making a way to show intention, humility, and connection to the divine. It's also the only form of lighting that smells like toast. The villagers gather around the shrine. A monk chants something low and rhythmic. His voice rises like smoke, slow and curling. The firelight dances on everyone's faces, softening wrinkles and hard edges. Somewhere behind you, someone begins to hum. You don't recognize the tune, but it makes your chest ache in a good way. The butter in the lamps flickers. Some melt quickly, others burn steady. One sputters out entirely, then relights itself, as if refusing to miss the moment. You close your eyes. The wind returns just slightly, like it's sucking you in. And for the first time in a long time, you don't feel like a visitor. You just feel warm. You wake to the sound of chickens arguing. It's early, but not offensively so. The kind of early where the light is polite and the mountains are still stretching. You step outside and breathe in steam. Not your own, someone nearby is boiling tea. George is already loading the cart. Of course he is. The man moves like someone who made a deal with time and gets extra hours in the day. HES humming something that might be a folk song or might just be his grumbling stomach. Today's leg of the journey heads down the Eastern Trail. Different village. Different dialect. Same butter. You set off under a sky full of promise and birds. Lots of birds. One of them follows you for nearly an hour. George insists it's a sign of luck. Or theft. Either it likes you, he says, or it's waiting for you to drop your lunch. The path narrows, winding along a series of ridges that cling to the mountain like stubborn goats. You walk single file now. Below, a thin river cuts through the valley like a thread sewn to tight. Around midday, you stop at a small hut with a prayer flag roof and a chimney that smokes only on Tuesdays. Inside, an old woman named Dawa serves you soup and hands you a folded cloth. It's butter parchment. Not the edible kind, the kind used in a curious village tradition where people write wishes and yak butter on waxed fabric, fold them into triangles, and hang them in trees. The belief is that birds will eat the butter and carry the wishes into the clouds. Scholars, predictably, debate the effectiveness of airborne dairy. But George writes his wish anyway. Something about fair trade and fewer blisters. You write yours too. You don't say what it is. You hang them in a crooked pine above the hut. The wind flutters the cloth like a slow applause. Then you eat soup that tastes vaguely of root vegetables and heavy dreams, and head out again. The yak doesn't complain once, which is possibly the strangest part of all. By the time you reach the next village, your feet feel like you borrowed them from someone who's never walked before. The trail leveled out hours ago, but your legs are still holding a grudge from the climb. George offers you a swig from a leather flask. It tastes like fermented goat mystery. You smile, anyway. This village is smaller, just 10 homes in the school that doubles as a barn and a dance hall when the moon is right. The welcome is warm, but practical. People greet you with nods, and one woman throws a handful of barley flour in the air to bless the yak. It sneezes. George starts setting up shop again. But this time, he lets you handle the trades. Butter for barley. Butter for wool. Butter for hand-made ink. One elderly man offers you 3 bundles of mint for a sliver of salted butter, then tells you a 30-minute story about the time his house was struck by lightning, and the only thing that survived was a wooden spoon and a picture of a yak. You're not sure if it's a warning, a joke, or a recipe. As the afternoon drifts in, the schoolhouse fills with the smell of stew. Dorge is invited to speak just a few words. They say but ends up recounting the entire history of his grandmother's butter barrel. You sit by the fire, watching the children shape small figures out of leftover butter on their plates. One sculpts a yak. Another makes a tiny pair of boots. One child just smears it across the table and calls it fog. Creativity, you realize, is deeply regional. Here's your historical note for this stop in some high-altitude communities. Butter was not only used for trade in food, but also as medicine. Applied to burns, mixed into salves, or even used as a base for healing herbs. One Tibetan manuscript refers to it as the fat of fire and earth, a phrase that sounds poetic until you imagine applying it to a paper cut. The evening settles gently. Someone plays a lute-like instrument that's missing a string but not its spirit. The villagers sing in rounds. You don't know the words, but the melody tugs at your spine like a lullaby you forgot. The butter, once again, is gone traded, eaten, sculpted, blessed. But the warmth, once again, lingers. And as you lie down on a straw mat near the fire, head against a rolled wool blanket, Dorge whispers, "Good day." You agree. And then the night closes in like a soft curtain, and you are already halfway asleep. Morning rises without urgency. You open your eyes to the faint smell of singed milk and wet wool. A chicken walks past your pillow, uninterested in your existence. The fire has long gone cold, but the coals still glow faintly, like memories trying not to fade. Dorge is already sipping tea by the cart. He gestures toward a cup waiting for you lukewarm, oversteeped, and completely perfect. You sit beside him, legs stretched, watching a slow mist curl over the village rooftops. Today's road is flatter. Less climbing, more drifting. The yak looks relieved. You pass rows of juniper trees, their scent sharp and comforting, like someone cleaned the world with herbs and forgot to put the cap back on. A river keeps you company to the left, low and chattering like a child who's been told to whisper. Dorge tells you a story from his youth how he once dropped a whole brick of butter into a sacred stream, and a week later it reappeared at a village 2 valleys away, perfectly intact. Was it the same brick? You ask. He shrugs. Close enough. That's the thing about these stories. They don't worry too much about accuracy, just direction. At midday, you reach a market town. It's bigger than the last of villages. There's a central square with flat stones worn smooth by footsteps. A group of traders is already there, their carts arranged in a loose, gossiping circle. Dorge introduces you to a woman named Himalayan, who deals in dyed coffin secrets. She wears 12 bracelets and trusts no one under 50. She smells the butter, then bites it. You flinch. She nods in approval. Soft, but honest, she says. That's the best compliment you'll get today. Here's your historical fact for this leg of the journey. Butter's value fluctuated not by weight, but by quality. Texture, scent, salt content, and even the age of the yak contributed to how much it could fetch at market. There were even competitions, unofficial, of course, for the most beautiful bricks. Some were pressed into carved molds, wrapped in cloth, and stored in stone shelves to age like cheese or grudges. You trade butter for blue dye, some dried plums, and a necklace shaped like a snow leopard's paw. Dorge trades to bricks for a pair of boots. You suspect H.E. is more excited about the boots than he lets on. As you leave the town, a boy runs after you with a bundle of lavender tied in string. For the butter, he says. It smells like my grandfather's prayers. You take it, because what else can you do? The sky grows heavy by late afternoon. Not with rain, just mood. Thick clouds settle above the ridgeline, the kind that make everything below feel quieter. You walk beneath them, boots thudding dully against packed dirt. Even the yak seems introspective. George whistles softly an old song that changes key halfway through. He claims it's a butter-minus churning rhythm, but you suspect it's just the only tune he remembers. You pause at a wayside stupa, a small white dome nestled in a clearing. It's surrounded by stone tablets etched with prayers, stacked like forgotten-to-minus-do lists for the universe. Someone has left a butter lamp at the base, still burning. George lights another from it, adds it to the pile. A warm wind brushes past, like breath from an unseen ancestor. He doesn't speak for a while. Then, without looking at you, he says, "This trade. It's not about butter." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. It's about not forgetting. You continue walking. As the path narrows again, he points to a narrow crack in the cliffside, a hidden rail, known only to butter traders and smug goats. You take it. Halfway up, the clouds split. Sunlight pours through like someone pulled back the curtain on the stage of a quiet play. The mountains glow gold. The path glitters with quartz flecks. The butter in the cart smells faintly sweeter in the warmth. You stop at a small outpost with a flat roof and no walls. A resting place for traders and travelers alike. There's no one there, but someone has left 2 bowls, 2 cups, and half a brick of butter wrapped in cloth. George grins. Old habit. You settle in. The sun lowers behind the far hills. The tea boils quickly on the flat stove. And now, your obscure cultural gem in certain Himalayan communities. Travelers left offerings not for gods, but for other travelers. A system of trust and memory. You take what you need. You leave what you can. No names. No accounts. Just belief in someone else's hunger. You sip your tea. Eat the bread. Smear butter across the top and watch it melt. No one says a word. And it's the best meal you've had in days. By morning, the sky is blue again, to blue, in fact. The kind of blue that makes you feel suspicious, like the weather's trying too hard. You and George rise early, shoulders stiff, fingers cold, and load the cart for the final stretch. The path ahead winds through wind-spent pine and carved stone, flanked by prayer walls whose painted mantras have faded into something softer than language. You pass a shepherd and his daughter, their herd trailing behind like woolen clouds on legs. He nods. She stares at the cart, then at you, then whispers something and giggles. Probably not a compliment, but you let it slide. This is the final valley. The end of the butter route. Not that it ends with trumpets or a ceremonial butter fountain. No, just another cluster of houses, smoke curling from rooftops, and a stone gate worn smooth by years of snow and welcome. The people here are quieter, slower. They nod instead of speaking. Shake hands like they're exchanging secrets. A few recognize George and slap him on the back like they're still not over something he said in 1991. You unload the butter carefully. Each brick is inspected, sniffed, sometimes licked. A young boy with wild hair tries to trade his shoes for half a pat. George says no, then gives him a sliver, anyway. For speed, he says. You're invited into the gathering hall, smoky room with murals of deer monks and improbable clouds. The ceiling is strung with yak-hair ropes and bundles of dried herbs that sway in slow circles, like the thoughts of very old minds. Lunch is served in bowls carved, from wooden softened by use. It's barley again, more tea, more butter. Someone asks for a story, and George delivers. He tells them about the time you almost dropped an entire brick into a ravine. Everyone laughs, especially the yak. You take it in stride. You're a part of the story now. A historical detail worth savoring in many parts of the Himalayas. Oral storytelling traveled alongside the butter trade. Merchants weren't just delivery men, they were messengers, memory minus keepers. With every trade came news, rumors, songs, and the occasional completely fabricated tale of supernatural butter that glowed in the dark. A girl plays a flute as the sun begins to set. Its notes are shaky, unsure, but no one minds. The sound rises like smoke through the cracks in the roof, curling toward stars that haven't arrived yet. You feel full, but not from food. From something else. Something older than salt, and almost as warm as butter. The next day, you prepare to return. George says nothing, but you can tell H.E.S. thinking it. His boots are already packed. The cart's been repaired with a bit of twine and some optimism. The yak looks resigned. You take one last walk through the village. Past the shrine with its flickering butter lamp. Past the market square, now quiet except for one man reweaving a basket. Past a little boy drawing spirals in the dust with a stick, pausing only to wave when you look his way. And then you're back on the trail. But this time, the cart is lighter. The butter is gone. Traded, gifted, sculpted, tasted. And in its place, blankets, salt, seeds, a wooden bowl painted with green flowers, one bar of soap that smells vaguely like regret. George walks in silence for a long while. Finally, he says, always feels like we're carrying something else back. You nod. It's true. Not heavier. But not lighter, either. The mountains greet you again like old acquaintances, kind but distant. The stones on the trail remember your feet. The trees have new stories to whisper, if you listen closely. You stop once to adjust a loose strap. As you do, you find a folded cloth tucked under a corner of the cart. It's parchment, the wish parchment from the hut days ago. The butter's long gone, but the cloth remains. You ask George if he left it there. He shrugs. Birds are slow this year. You tuck it into your pocket. Historical curiosity of the day in some villages. Wishes written in butter were considered unfinished until the butter was consumed by animal, fire, or time. The wish could linger indefinitely if untouched. A gentle reminder that even dreams have expiration dates. As the sun lowers behind you, the road becomes familiar again. The monastery appears in the distance, its silhouette like a friend waving from far off. You're nearly home. But something's changed. You're not just a traveler. You're a bearer of trade, of stories, of something slow and meaningful that melts on the tongue and lingers in the soul. And you realize, the butter was never the point. The road back into Pangmo is as you left it, sloped, stony, smelling faintly of pine smoke and tired animals. But something feels different now. The village doesn't rush to greet you. It doesn't need to. It has seen hundreds of returns before. People come back. Butter comes back. Stories come back. The pace of life here isn't built for dramatic homecomings. It prefers slow odds and hot tea. Sewing is churning again in her courtyard. Sleeves rolled up, face calm, hands moving like they always have. She looks up when you pass, gives you a tired smile, and then goes back to work. That's how you know she missed you. Dorjan loads the cart without fanfare. A few villagers drift over. Some poke curiously at the salt bricks. One smells the soap and drinkles their nose. You deliver the bowl with the green flowers to an elder who runs the communal kitchen. He looks at it like someone just handed him a family heirloom, then says nothing. Just holds it close and walks away. There's a familiarity to it all, like your footsteps have been folded back into the soil where they belong. The yak lies down in its pen and immediately begins snoring. Loudly. Heroically. George sits cross-legged near the well-and poles of his boots, examining the soles like they'd betrayed him. Still holding, he mutters. Then, softer barely. Someone brings you tea. Stirring again. This time, she joins you. She smells like ash and butter and wind. You sip in silence. Here's your historical fact for this quiet chapter. Himalayan villages like Pang Mo often operated on closed loops of trade, not just goods, but knowledge, blessings, even weather lore. A trader returning from the circuit wasn't just delivering items, they were restoring balance. Dorj mentions the soap again, how he probably overpaid. Suring nods then adds, but it smells like clouds. You all agree this is both meaningless and entirely accurate. And then, from somewhere across the square, a boy starts to sing. Off meine ski. Loudly. It's awful. And perfect. Because this soft return is what the butter road always leads to. Not applause. Just home. You spend your last night in Pang Mo beneath a roof of woven grass and faint candlelight. The walls creak gently. The wind presses against them like a friend too polite to enter. Outside, the mountain sleeps. And you, surprisingly, are not far behind. Before you drift, you glance across the room. On a low table sits a butter lamp. Not fancy. Not ceremonial. Just a simple clay bowl with a tiny flame dancing over golden fat. You wonder how many miles of road are suspended in that pool of warmth. How many stories melted into it. How many wishes once whispered to it in the dark. You close your eyes. And in the soft hush of the room, your mind wanders to all you've seen: the narrow trails, the hidden wishes, the butter lions melting in silence, the laughter over soup, the quiet trades, the shared bread. You remember the parchment wish in your pocket. Still folded. Still lingering. You take it out. Unfold it. And this time, you write something new. Something smaller. Simpler. You press a thumbprint into the corner, then place it near the flame, not in it. Just beside. Letting the warmth touch it. That's enough. Outside, the village sleeps with one eye open, as mountain villages often do. Always listening for the next cart. Always ready for the next quiet story. Now, for one final obscure tradition, in some Himalayan households, families would whisper gratitude to their butter stockpiles before winter. They believed that butter, like fire, had memory and that showing thanks could keep it from turning sour. You whisper your own thanks. To the roads. To the yak. To Dorj. To the soft, strange currency of warmth. And as you lie back, breath deep and even, you realize the trade is done. But the story is still glowing. Morning unfolds with its usual slowness. You wake not to a rooster or a bell, but to the faint clink of a wooden spoon against a clay pot. Someone stirs porridge just outside the window. Someone else coughs twice, like punctuation. The mountains are still holding onto their shadows. Your things are already packed. There was much. A scarf, a pouch of dried nettles, a bit of blue dyed thread, and a sliver of butter someone wrapped for you in wax paper just in case. You step outside. The courtyard is the same as the day you arrived, dusty, full of tiny tasks being done with ancient care. The woman from the kitchen waves. The boy with the stick draws another spiral in the dirt. Dorj is there too, seated by the wall, sipping tea that has probably gone cold, but refuses to be discarded. He looks up, gives you a nod that somehow contains both farewell and welcome. You sit beside him. No words pass for a long while. Then he says, "You'll come back." Not a question. Just a truth, as plain as stone. You both sip in silence. The air is cold, kind. Eventually, he reaches into his coat and hands you something small and heavy. A butter-stamped carved wood worn from use, shaped like a flower. For your next trade, he says, and that's it. No speech. No long goodbye. Because the butter road never really ends. It just turns in on itself like a spiral in the dust, waiting to be traced again. As you walk away from the village, you pass the monastery again. The prayer flags flap gently. A better sculpture still rests on a windowsill half Midas melted, wholly perfect. And you don't look back. You don't need to. Because what you carry now isn't weight. It's warmth. Now, let the roads grow quiet. Let the cartwheels stop turning. Let the snow settle softly on the narrow paths between villages whose names you may already be forgetting. You are no longer walking. You are resting. Wrapped in the soft breath of high mountain wind and the low song of a yak somewhere in the distance, in the memory of a wooden spoon stirring a pot just past dawn. The butter has been traded. The stories have been told. The hands have worked, warmed, shared, and stilled again. There is nothing more to pack. Nothing more to deliver. Only this stillness now. Let your breath move like mist across stones low, unhurried, curling back into the quiet spaces behind your ribs. Let your thoughts soften, like butter left near a warm stove. Let your shoulders sink into the bed beneath you, like a well-worn mat beneath an old trader's back. You've made the journey. You've followed the trail through fog and frost, through high passes and low markets, through tales told over tea and dreams scribbled in grease on cloth. Now it's time to return. Not to where you began, but to yourself. To the hush between one footstep and the next. To the glow of a lamp at the edge of sleep. You've carried butter. You've carried stories. Now carry rest. Let the cart be still. Let the path dissolve. Let the flame beside your bed flicker gently once. And fade. Good night, traveler.